Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. My name is Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today's Thursday, April 25th, and on Press Pass we typically have a couple of area journalists in to talk about the recent headlines and what stories may be coming up. But today we're going to kind of have a bit of a shift of focus, if we can. We have two gentlemen in here to talk with us a little bit about the nature of the news business itself and where things may be going. As many of you, I'm sure, know, the news business has been through a couple of decades of real upheaval and changes from the older traditional model of putting out a weekly or a daily newspaper. We now have digital content, we have social media, we have websites, we have all kinds of changes that have happened over that time and the way you folks like to get your news. So we're really pleased to have with us today in the studio Mr. Fredric Rutberg, who is the publisher of New England Newspapers, a chain of papers that owns the Berkshire Eagle, which is based in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, the Bennington Banner, the Brattleboro Reformer, and the Manchester Journal. Also joining us are Kevin Moran, who is the executive editor of those four papers. And gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Really a pleasure to have you both with us. Mr. Rutberg, just to get us started here, I guess you and a group of business partners and associates acquired the four papers from Digital First Media, the ownership group that owned the Eagle and the Banner, the Reformer, the Journal, and about, I think, 50 other newspapers around the country almost exactly 3 years ago, as it turns out, in the spring of 2016. And I guess I think one of the four of you had a bit of a newspaper background with a newspaper out in Buffalo, New York, if I recall correctly. But the other three of you kind of were, as I gather, relatively new to journalism at that time. So what led you to form the group and acquire those papers?
Well, I was the one who got the ball moving. I was a judge in Massachusetts, district court judge, which is a great job, but it came with mandatory retirement. And I was facing mandatory retirement, thinking, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I felt healthy and I still had a little bit of a fastball left. So unbeknownst to me, I was with my wife out in Nantucket in the summer of 2014, and we went to a lecture. It was a benefit, the Nantucket Athenaeum, and Joe Klein, the political writer from Time magazine, was speaking, and in the middle of his speech, he said somewhat offhandedly, democracy requires citizenship, and citizenship requires a town square. And I looked at my wife and whispered, the Berkshire Eagle. I lived in the Berkshire since 1972. She was born and lived most of her life there. And we remember when the Eagle was a much stronger paper, when it performed that role of being town square better than it did in 2015. And so, because we were on vacation, we talked about it, the next day, and came back with this idea, and it was, it was almost like whimsical. But I pursued it. I started talking to people, and then, in the process, I was fortunate enough to get to know Hans Morris, and it attracted him to it. Although I didn't plan to, I just wanted to learn from him. And then he mentioned that he talked to Bob Wilmers about it, and I knew Bob for 40 years. And Bob, for those people who don't know, was the CEO and chairman of MNT Bank, a very large regional bank centered in Buffalo. And but Bob has a second home in Stockbridge, as does Hans. And I had known Bob for many years, and he became interested, and then the three of us were the team. But Bob would say at meetings, gee, I got this friend Stan, he was retired, he's a former publisher of the Buffalo News. He says, I don't know anything about newspapers, but Stan does. You mind if I talk to my friend Stan? Of course not. And then eventually, after time, well, do you mind if we patch Stan in on this conversation? Of course not. And so it took a year from the time that Bob got involved till we actually closed on the sale, which was, as you say, 3 years ago, just about now. And during that time, Stan got interested. He was the emeritus publisher of the Buffalo News, and so he made made 4 of us. Unfortunately, both Bob and Stan have passed since we did the purchase.
So then, over the past 3 years, since you've been at the helm of the papers, what's been the broad strategy that you and your partners have attempted to put in place down there? Obviously, you were looking at the Eagle and saw that there was a need for some changes. What are some of those changes that you've been trying to implement since then?
Well, first of all, when we announced that we were going to purchase the papers, and that was April of 2016, we did a series of press conferences, one of which was in Bennington. But somewhere early on, someone asked Bob Wilmers, "What's your goal for this? What do you want to do?" And without hesitating, he just said, "Well, to create the finest group of community newspapers in America." I never heard him say that before, but we have not looked back from that. That's been our touchstone since that time. And I then was asked to describe our business plan. And our business plan was extremely difficult and complex and very revolutionary. We said that we were going to increase the quality of the content. And if we did that, we would increase the readership. And if we did that, we could guarantee sustainability. So we've been working for 3 years to build the finest group of community newspapers in America by increasing the quality of the content. And I think we've done a whole lot of other things along the way, but that's been the driving force.
Okay.
That's been the driving force.
So Kevin, as the executive editor, you're the guy in charge of implementing that strategy and that vision. I guess I just wondered, how has news gathering changed? Since not only in the last 3 years or so, since Mr. Rutberg and his partners acquired the Eagle and the other 3 papers. But looking back even farther than that, over the past 10, 15 or so years, I mean, both of us remember a time when, you just wrote a couple of stories and you put out a print newspaper and kind of that was the job and it was all good. And obviously we're in a whole nother world now. Has the basic task of a reporter kind of changed a lot or what's different?
Well, the common denominator is that journalists, reporters, photographers need to be able to tell a very good story well. And that's been a constant for the past 100 years of journalism plus. The environment in which we're able to tell our stories now has certainly evolved. So we still have our print newspapers, which are fantastic, and we love them and we cherish them. But we also have, as you mentioned early on in the broadcast, websites. We have social media. We have apps. We have myriad platforms that we can put out our news stories and be able to tell those stories in different ways. We can tell them with video. We can tell them through pictures. We can tell them through audio. And of course, the written story, which we're famous for in this business. But at its core, it's really the ability to tell the story is really sort of the important thing. I think under the new ownership and Fred's reference to improving the quality of the content, not only have we been able to improve the quality of the content, but we've also been able to improve the quantity of it as well, because strategically, Fred and his colleagues have made strategic investments in expanding smartly our ability to cover things with some strategic hires and journalists and what have you, and so that's really been, I think, a game changer for us.
Great. Well, and how do you sort of get a sense as to what your readers want? Do you sort of solicit feedback from them, saying, hey, we'd like more coverage of this or less coverage of that? I mean, back in the day, covering the town governments, town hall, city hall, was always kind of a major thing. Is that still what readers seem to expect to read in the paper or on your websites?
Well, I would say definitely that government coverage is really important to helping inform our citizenry. It might not be our most popular stories on our websites. However, That is part of our core mission. Is to be the fourth estate, to keep an eye on taxpayer dollars. You know the deal, and we do that quite well. But we find too that people want to read about their neighbors. They want to know what's going on, and that's what we're able to provide them. And we tell a lot of great feature stories, human interest stories, and what have you. We do a lot of engagement with our readers and our audiences, whether it's through forums, whether it's just the good old-fashioned phone calls. We get a lot of email. Social media happens to be one of those areas too, where we get a lot of reader feedback there, good, bad.
And I'm sure they're not shy about sharing.
And they share it quite well. As a matter of fact, we welcome it.
Right.
But that really does sort of inform us what people are thinking about, and really. They always want more local news. At the base of it, there's always the desire for more, and so that's good to know, because that is a key to our future.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the, of course, the big, I guess, dilemmas of modern day journalism is that. The old business model where, display ads and even more critically, I think, classified advertising helped kind of float the boat financially for a paper. I mean, that whole model seems to have come under a tremendous strain. I mean, not just from Craigslist or places like that, but the advertising revenue, as I recall it from the past, struggle that you got from print advertising was still a bigger slice of the pie than what was coming in from the digital side, even as the digital side of the operation was growing in importance and assuming a bigger part of the whole picture. I guess I just was wondering, is that starting to kind of level out a little bit at this point, at least for you folks, or is that still kind of an area you're thinking, we've got to figure out a way to leverage more money on the digital side of the operation? Is that kind of working itself out at this point?
We're working on it. It is the conundrum for the industry. I mean, what's happening nationwide, or worldwide actually, in the Western world, you're seeing the shift of the proportion of revenue that newspapers or publications are receiving. It is growing from the circulation side. It used to be a smaller portion from circulation, a greater portion from advertising. It still is. But the proportions are shifting. More and more is coming from circulation, which reflects what's happening in the world, because there are all these options that you mentioned before. So suddenly we're learning that we have to charge people to see what to read what we produce. Whereas Kevin and I were talking on the way up, passing some stories back, and I was saying, when I was a kid, papers were a nickel. Now it's a buck and a quarter. Well, other things haven't gone up 20 times that in that period of time. So we're trying to. We have that situation. We're getting more of our revenue and trying to produce more of our revenue from circulation to offset what's happening in the loss of print. As far as the proportion between print advertising and digital advertising, we're working very hard to try to increase the digital advertising. But one thing to be borne in mind is that about 80%, 80, of all digital advertising is either placed with Facebook or Google. So the rest of the world works hard to divvy up the other 20%.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So the ability to increase that slice of the pie is there, but we're taking on some very, very powerful invested interests. Wow. I mean, that's almost like, how do you break out of that? That's a really tough statistic. I guess I just wondered also, I guess one of the ways around that might be to share content across different newspapers, different publications. I mean, articles that you might produce down in Pittsfield for the Eagle also would appear in some of the other papers if they have some kind of connection or relevance. How do you balance
keeping each one of the papers kind of regionally kind of focused on what's going on in the immediate neighborhood versus sharing the content across the 4 publications?
Well, certainly when we were owned by Digital First Media and we had gone through lots of newsroom downsizing, just overall newspaper downsizing in general, it was kind of required that you had to share material amongst the group of newspapers that made it the most sense. However, we did that knowing that that Bennington is Bennington, Brattleboro is Brattleboro, the Berkshires are the Berkshires, and being very self-conscious about it and aware. Since over the past 3 years, as a matter of fact, rather quickly, we started to diminish the amount of common pages amongst the papers because those common pages weren't exactly resonating effectively in individual markets. They might work, say, in Bennington, but really didn't work over in Brattleboro and that type of thing. So now we've had the luxury, the opportunity to be able to build up our resources there, to be able to retain more local content for the local papers. The one thing that we do still share across the board is our food page. Food is universal, recipes are universal.
Very popular in my house anyway.
Exactly. So that is just, and we have excellent an excellent food section that does run in all of our papers. But and then of course, just because Bennington is Bennington doesn't mean that it's isolated from the Berkshires, because quite frankly, we've had recent stories where there's been actually growing amount of collaboration, for example, between Bennington and North Adams. The YMCA collaboration is a great example of that. Act 46 is compelling in Stamford, Vermont, a conversation with Clarksburg, Massachusetts, to possibly create the first cross-state or interstate school district.
Really fascinating story.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we're not as provincial as in that respect, because we do have a lot of cross-pollination when it comes to news.
What about younger readers? It's often been said, people who read newspapers are we're all old people or whatever. And their demographic is shifting, and younger folks seem to be attracted, very much so to social media. In fact, it seems like a lot of them are on the phone all the time. Do you have to take any kind of special effort to kind of bring in the younger demographic into the mix, or just figure, at some point in their lives, everybody starts, buying a house and paying a lot of taxes, and all of a sudden, these sorts of things become a lot more interesting?
We're on Twitter because all kinds of readers are on Twitter, and Twitter happens to still be a very popular source, from the high school Generation Z on up in terms of a news source for them. So that's where we are. So we are where those younger readers are. Now, is a student in high school or in their early 20s going to be excited about reading about the fact that real estate taxes are going up in their town? Probably not yet.
but they will be.
But they will be. But we also are covering lots of other stories that resonate with younger crowds. Pretty soon in Vermont, we'll be rolling out some new and interesting features that will have broad appeal to not only our traditional newspaper and digital readership in an older age bracket, but I think it'll also really appeal to a younger age bracket as well. But maybe one of the things that we have to do is to keep on doing a better job of literally getting in front of younger readers. And getting in front of younger readers means having content on their phones,
right,
and having a good digital presence and mobile presence.
Mr. Rutberg, I was wondering, one of the things that seems to have advanced a lot over the last 10 or so years is this sort of nonprofit model of journalism. There have been some organizations that have emerged. A lot of them are purely online. In fact, the only ones I can think of off the top of my head are all online, but basically are subsidized by a philanthropic organization or donors or membership subscriptions. And the purpose isn't to make a profit and kind of be running a viable business as one normally might, but that in theory gives the journalists sort of a secure platform to go out and do some journalism that might not ordinarily come to light. I guess, what are your thoughts about that model? Do you find that either interesting or intriguing, or kind of like, well, that's good for some publications perhaps, but it really wouldn't be anything you'd want to be exploring?
No, it's something we are exploring. We are a for-profit company, and we make a profit, and
that's a good thing.
And that's that's key to our existence. When I was saying that Bob Wilmer's laid the gauntlet down, said we're going to be the finest group of community newspapers in America, I omitted that a few seconds later someone asked the same question to Hans Morris, my other colleague, and who's the chairman of our board, and Hans said he wanted to build an organization that would last 100 years. And so we need profit to do that. And something you can rely on. The problem with nonprofit is you can't rely on it. It's not that it's whimsical, but that it's subject to fashion that you can't control. Having said that, I'm very much aware of what's happening in the world, and we've been investigating it. I've had some conversations with people in the Seattle Times. The Seattle Times seems to be doing a really good job of it. They first started with just getting local businesses to fund specific areas of investigative or entrepreneurial enterprise reporting. Being in Seattle, they had some companies that, Amazon, Boeing, Microsoft. So they had some pretty good places to go, and it worked. And it worked well enough, but now they've just announced that about 2 weeks ago that they've actually formed a nonprofit. I've spoken to someone in the Berkshires about establishing something to try to, again, use it to fund special projects, things that may or may not themselves make sense from an economic point of view. But if we pursue that, it will be as an adjunct to what we do. We are a for-profit business, and I see us staying that way for the foreseeable future.
Sure. I guess, what do you both see as the next big sort of evolutionary change that might be coming down the road here? I mean, we've gone through so much upheaval and change in the last 20 or so years since the arrival of the digital era in full force, and it just seems like, okay, at some point, can't we just all settle down here and have things just sort of be the same for a little while? But of course, the world keeps on churning along, and new things keep coming up. And I just wondered, from the standpoint of not just news gathering, but also from the business side of it, do you see anything out there on the horizon that you're thinking, we need to get ahead of that change or be prepared for something that's coming along? I didn't know if there was anything in particular that you saw looming out there.
Well, I can jump in on the business side.
Good, and it'll give me a few seconds to think.
We are investigating something right now, a way for people to purchase actually just about pay for what you use. Because years ago, when I first got involved in this, and I'm an ancient, I've been doing this for 3 years now, or 5. I started almost 5 years ago, so I've been getting my MBA on the job. But one of the things that people said that it was going to evolve into a situation where, and over time, people will just pay for whatever they read. Just you want to read an article in the New York Times, hit that, you'll pay for that. Read an article in Wall Street Journal, read an article in Manchester Journal. You'll just pay for what you read, not actually have subscriptions like we know now. That's a thought. But we're now engaged with a company that will provide that in a way. It's another way to deal with the paywall. which people go online, they hit the
Right.
paywall, and then they're given an option you can buy with ours, which is fairly typical. For 99 cents, you can subscribe online for up to a month, and you read everything you want. But to do that, you have to fill out all the forms. You have to give us a lot of information. Takes time. People don't want to do that. This idea is it allows you to simply hit the button and say, I want to read this now, and you get it now. And we will be charging the user either a fee to read an article, or a fee to read everything for a period of time, like a day, or a fee to read that day's paper. And you have that option. You just hit that, and you'll be right through. You don't do anything else. But what happens is once you get to the threshold of $5, then they say to you, uh-oh, you're done now. You got to now give us your information, and we will just bill you for what you use. And so this is a system being used in Europe now, and in certain places in Germany and the Netherlands in particular. And the nice thing is that this, if we proceed with this. This company is trying to sign up thousands of newspapers. We actually approached them. They're not looking for us. They're looking for bigger companies. But the idea was you could then read any paper, any article, in any publication that they do, and the prices would be different. But then you get billed once a month for what you don't want to get billed. Your credit card would be charged once a month for what you actually read. So we're very close to making some sort of a deal with this company. And if we do that, I think it will be cutting edge, because they haven't established yet in the U.S.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And on the news gathering side, Kevin?
Well, I think it's safe to say that over the past 15 years, I've learned to expect the unexpected, to know that the future is unwritten,
Right.
but to know that we have to be smart about our future, and we have to be where our readers are. And we will be there, and we will think of new and interesting ways to support our journalism, and we'll find other revenue streams through events, perhaps, well, which we do now, quite frankly, and through other creative ideas, such as this subscription model that Fred mentioned, and really, the core mission is to tell stories about our community. And tell them well, and tell them in a way where it really connects with people, not just on a political level, but on an emotional level. Because if we can continue to connect with our readers in a way that resonates with them, with their hearts and their soul and their minds, they're going to want to keep us around.
And that's what it's all about.
Indeed.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today. Really a pleasure to have you both here in the studio and talk about, this really important thing. I mean, I find myself, I'm not sure if the right word is troubled, but when the news media and journalism is under such, kind of attack sometimes from various places, and the polarization, division that seems to be going on at the moment in our country and our society, it's just so important what you both are doing to tell stories, tell them accurately, fairly, and objectively, and provide a source of information and exchange of ideas for folks out in the broader communities. And it's just I sometimes read about what some of the criticisms of journalism that are going on and just cringe. I mean, I find it a paradox almost that so much great journalism is being produced now, and it gets so criticized so many times, and also hard to make a living doing it. So what you're doing is really important, and keep going.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
And thank all of you again for watching. I hope you found the show interesting, and we'll be back again with Press Pass again in another month or so, and have a great day. See you later.